Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are two math teachers who, together,
with you, the community of educators worldwide, want to build and deliver math lessons that spark engagement,
fuel learning,
and ignite teacher action. Welcome to episode number 5. Too many resources and too little time. A math mentoring moment with Nicole Martin.
I am so ready for this. Let's dive right in.
In episode 5 of the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast, Nicole Martin joins us today for a math mentoring moment. Nicole has shared with us that she has recently been exposed to many great math resources recently, such as Threeact math tasks, Estimation 180, and many more. But she's struggled to organize her math block to include these resources with intentionality on an ongoing basis.
Listen in as we welcome Nicole to the podcast, and we will put our minds together to work through this very common challenge we all experience across the grades.
Just a quick note that early on in the interview, there were some sound challenges. However, they do subside, so stick with it, and welcome Nicole to the show. Nicole, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great, thanks.
Awesome. I'm wondering, we want to thank you first for joining us on the Making Math Moments podcast. We're wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What are you teaching? And, a little bit of a background for those listening at home.
Well, I am a third grade teacher in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've taught this is my 20th year. And in the last, 4 or 5 years, I've taught exclusively math. So, I love learning new ways to teach and love my students and excited about all the new things.
Nicole, why did you want to become a teacher? Like I always think of that. We ask these same questions to everybody that we're interviewing, but what is it like that moment that you knew that you want to become a teacher and why you want to become a teacher? Can you tell us a little bit about that backstory for you?
Yeah, so I don't ever remember wanting to do anything else. I maybe had a quick stint wanting to be a librarian because I thought it'd be fun to scan books, but I've always wanted to teach. My mom was a teacher, and and even now, if people say, what would you rather do if you weren't teaching? And I just can't think of anything. It's what I've always wanted to do. I love education. I love the kids. I love everything about it. It really is what I was meant to be. So
awesome. That's amazing. Cause I don't think I can say that about myself. It wasn't until later that I was like, yeah, I think I want to do this. Even though I came from a family of teachers.
Oh, really?
But great for you to kind of be so in love with this thing or from an early age.
Set your sights on the goal. Yeah, for sure. We're wondering, are you willing to share with us your most memorable math moment from math class? It could be as a teacher or as a student.
Well, as a student, I never was a math kid. I never had an affinity to it. I didn't really like it. I didn't enjoy it. So it was actually really surprising to me that I fell in love with teaching it. I was kind of handed my first day of teaching. It was like, we don't have a curriculum for reading, but here's your math curriculum. So I was like, let's go with it. And I loved it. But I'd have to say my most memorable as far as a teacher is really in the last year or two. I had kids, I started doing estimation with the kids and having the kids get up and talk. And I had a student come up and she actually wanted to share a wrong answer with the class and how she got there. And I was kind of like, what? It was shocking. And then I realized, well, we've been doing estimation. So we're in a sense, we're kind of wrong every day and it's a safe thing. And so having that like aha moment of like, wow, the kids are starting to feel safe being incorrect. And that was for me, like, I don't know, a huge payoff. Like I really felt like we were getting somewhere as far as their comfort and their willingness to share with each other. So that was kind of a defining moment for me.
That's awesome. That's a sounds like that safe, non-threatening classroom environment is being developed in your classroom, which is great. I'm curious, for your estimation, how do you go about that? Like, is there any resources that you're using? Maybe some on the web. I know of a few. I'm just curious if if maybe it's the same ones, or maybe I could learn something from you here.
Yeah, I use Estimation 180. Also, Steve Wyborney's. He has I think it's him, has a series of 4 estimation things, like it builds on each other. So those 2 sites are the sites that I've been using primarily in my classroom for estimation.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely for John and I,
Yeah.
Estimation 180 is a big one. And anytime I'm working with elementary students, Steve Wyberney, I'm
Yes.
constantly sharing
Yes.
Splat. And I know he's got the estimation
Yes.
clipboard going on right now and a few other darn, I'm going to lose it, Conundrum or Cube something.
Yeah.
I just butchered it, but I bet you if you Google,
Right.
Steve
Yes.
and cubes,
Yeah.
and he's got all kinds of cool things going on. So
Yeah.
both Andrew
Yes.
Stedell for
That's the name.
Estimation 180 and Steve Wyberney. So
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, just
What-
was curious if maybe there was some others. We learned something new last night when we were interviewing Matthew, and he shared a few resources with us. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
What amazed me about Steve is how much, like, when he's like, I'm going to give you some Splat, I'm not just going to give you some Splat, I'm going to give you like 100. And or the new one, the SD,
The mysteries. We just did that yesterday.
yeah,
The kids
SD mysteries.
loved it.
He's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. And he's like, I got a whole bunch for you. And then the same with those 100 grids that he uses. He's got a ton of puzzles there. What SD one did you use yesterday?
We did the first one. It was a little, the cup, it would look like little muffins in a cup, and they love that. And they really built on it and enjoyed it and got a kick out of it. So it was fun. And I love seeing it when they get it.
Yeah. Could you walk us through like what that might look like? Just so we get a sense of what that would look like in your classroom. I think it would help paint a picture for us, but also for anyone listening who's new to this.
So the activity generally, the activity is the kids make an estimation, they get a picture, and they're comfortable with estimating because we've done it a lot. And so we had the kids make an estimate, and this time usually I have them do it in their notebooks, but this time we were short on time, so I had the kids actually I went through, and I usually don't have everybody share their estimation with me. I usually have them talk to somebody and then write it down. But since they didn't have a way to write it down, I actually wrote down everybody's estimation on the board. And then we talked about, and so then we went through, and as the first clue was revealed, and it was, it's a number under 50. So then we talked about which estimates would have to be eliminated based on that. And then we went through the next clue, and has to be a multiple of 3. So then we talked about that, and I had the kids talk with each other. And so we just kind of went down the clues and really eliminated answers that weren't reasonable or didn't apply, especially since it was also the first time we'd done it. I really wanted to make it a very guided lesson. And so we went through until we eventually got to the last one, and the kids were able to guess it. And so usually I would have them write their own estimates and write their reasoning down. But this time we did it whole group on the board because they didn't have any paper and pencil. So
very cool. Very cool. That's awesome. And so we're wondering, the purpose of this call was to allow you to come on and kind of share one of your struggles or challenges that you might have experienced either currently or something that maybe has been, an itch that you've been trying to scratch for, quite some time, knowing what that's like in the classroom. We all have all kinds of challenges, but we're curious, like, what's on your mind lately?
So I think it was last year that I stumbled on Christina Tondevol's Virtual Math Summit. And that was kind of when this whole world, I've always kind of done number talks and things like that and really encouraged kids to talk about their thinking and trying to make a safe environment. But I don't know, math, jumping from curriculum to curriculum and just never really feeling, and then with the Common Core and all this, never finding a place to land. And so, in discovering Estimation 180 and Threeact tasks and Notice and Wonder and all these different things that I learned from all these speakers in her math summit, it just kind of opened up this is what I was looking for. This is how I want my math classroom to go. And so we've been doing Threeact tasks and really trying to spark curiosity, as you guys say, and just get kids excited about math and wanting to discover, want to have a reason to solve these problems. But my dilemma is I also have a whole slew of standards, and we're not given a curriculum necessarily. I use a lot of Engage New York and Zurn, but we're not married to one curriculum. My principal doesn't really care how we teach it as long as we do it. So my dilemma is I'm kind of overwhelmed with amazing resources and amazing ideas, and I just don't know how to marry the two. I don't really know the best way to structure my classroom so that I have a healthy balance? Or is it that if we do enough of these problem-based activities that the learning falls in? Because I do know that with this kind of thing, the payoff might not be immediate. You might not see the payoff immediately. You might have to, be in it for a while. But I just am trying to find a way to make sure they're learning the standards and also use all these great things I've been discovering the last couple of years.
Yeah, this is really awesome, and I feel like we've heard very similar stories before when we chat with teachers. One thing I do want to clarify, because we do have an international audience, what I've noticed, us being Canadians and outsiders to the United States. In the United States, when you refer to curriculum, typically what you're talking about, I think, is like a resource, could be a textbook, or it might be a digital online resource. Whereas like here, I know where we're from in Ontario, we call the curriculum like the standard.
Okay.
So kind of a tricky thing. So we're not saying, you need to change your language. We're just making sure that everyone listening, so that they know. So you're a Common Core state. Correct. So you're using the Common Core state standards. And you're using, and it sounds like your administrator is like, in your school or district is open to, any curriculum or any resource to allow you to meet those standards. Correct. So, so lots of stuff in it. And it sounds like you're a little bit challenged with, how do I make it all sort of fit together?
Yeah. Yes. What's that look like? So,
Nicole, is there anything else that you could add to that, or anything else that is bothering you or struggles just to get everything out into the open?
The other thing is just the diversity. So I used to find that, you'd have a couple of kids that struggle maybe with number sense or forgetting some procedures. But I do teach at a Title I school, which means an at-risk community. 70% of our population is free and reduced. So there's a lot that the students bring to school with them, and the learning gaps are getting wider and wider. So now I have kids that need to count 1 to 1 to add 3 plus 6. And I also have kids that know, advanced multiplication, and they're all in the same classroom together. And just really trying to make sure I'm meeting the needs of both sets of students. And then, of course, the ones in the middle, and finding that happy medium and making sure I'm reaching all my learners is another big concern for me, and trying to do that. And, so that's another thing that's been a struggle. As teachers, we always want to meet the needs of all our students. And, but I find that those gaps are getting so much wider. It's like, oh, I need to start at the beginning with you. And I never taught kindergarten. I don't know where to start. So that's kind of been a challenge too, kind of feeling like I need to learn, more foundational things, because I've always taught third grade. So, which I love, but it's kind of a hindrance sometimes because I don't have that base knowledge, of what kids start with.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I've finally opened my eyes to, was, reaching way down into kindergarten and the early years to sort of make some connections between what kids are learning down there when they're learning how to count even 1 to 1, and the other counting principles. Like, there's so much complexity going on there. And like you said, there's students that are in our classrooms. I was in a grade 8 class it was a grade 7 classroom the other day. And we were doing a task. It wasn't a complex task by any means, but it involved proportional relationships. And this student was counting 1 to 1. The rate was 3, 3 for every 1. And basically we had, or the ratio was 3 for every 1. And they were going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Wow.
7, 8, 9, like, and using the fingers. And, we're not going to discourage that or anything like that. But, we've got to know sort of like, so what's the
Right.
next jumping point for, for that student?
Definitely.
So I'm wondering if we kind of back up and maybe you can help us understand some of the resources that, like, you've already talked about some of the estimation resources, which, again, like, even just that, like, for estimation,
Mm-hmm.
you've already, mentioned two pretty phenomenal resources that are out there. And I'm sure there's others that you've been using. What are some other resources? I know you said as like a full curriculum, you were talking about Engage New York, which I believe is also like considered Eureka Math, I
Yes,
believe.
it is. Yep.
Awesome. And you mentioned another one. What was the other one? Zurn, was it?
Zurn. So Zurn is actually the same as Eureka, but it's an online program that it basically teaches the kids. It has little math chats and towers of power, and so the kids kind of learn on their own. Well, not on their own, but the structure is that you would teach a whole group lesson or a small group lesson, and then the kids go and do a lesson on their own. And when I found that, I was like, this is it, because kids love computers, they love learning like that. But I found that my low kids they should be able to do 4 lessons a week. And my struggling students were getting through 1 lesson, if that, a week. And my other kids were flying. And so I was like, this might not be the gold mine that I thought it was. But that is the same as Eureka Math. It's just computer based. And so
Very cool.
It's really engaging. The kids do love it. They always ask, are we doing it? Are we doing Zurn? So they like it. But,
Yeah.
and I also don't know if they're old enough to know how to not teach themselves, but like to know when you don't understand something, or, our attitude when we're trying to learn something off of YouTube, you have to watch it, you have to listen. I don't know how developed their minds are to be all in, to pay attention and get the most out of it.
Right. Well, and what I'm hearing too is, you have a lot of resources in that. And while that does, yes, like for us as the ones planning our lessons, it seems very overwhelming. But at the same time, I'm wondering if maybe that's a good thing, because, maybe Zurn is a great resource, but maybe not all the time. Right. So coming back to that idea of balance. So,
Yes.
interesting. I'm wondering, like, can you share with us, like, what does your typical process sound like when you're doing some planning? Like, I'm sure you have a long range plan in mind, but then when it comes down to, getting, I guess, closer to that weekly outlook or that weekly plan, can you take us through a little bit of, like, what factors are coming into mind for you, or factors coming into play to make some of those decisions?
Well, just kind of looking at where they're at and what they're learning. A lot of formative assessment, throughout. There's exit tickets every day, and so seeing where the kids are struggling, or I do some kind of a number talk of some sort every day, or counting around the class, or quick images, and trying to see where they're at with that. And then just building through the standards. I mean, looking at the standards and where I need to be. And my one challenge in 3rd grade is that they introduce multiplication. So I find that we kind of lag there for a long time, because, it's all new to them for most of the students. And so we kind of spend a long time on that, and just really seeing. And then, when they're working, where are the gaps and what things do they still need to go over, arrays, or, whatever, or algorithms and things like that, or not algorithms, but equations. And, just kind of looking at where the students are struggling, and where they're making it. And then just kind of developing through that. And then looking at the different resources I have, but like I said, my personal weakness is I'm kind of like cast a really wide net, and I want to do all of it. And finding ways to narrow that down is sometimes challenging.
Yeah, for sure.
The curse of the committed teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Return on investment, like, is it worth all this time?
Right. And like when you earlier, when you talked about your main struggle, saying like, I've got all these great things, and how do I piece these things together to meet the needs of my students? Which is a big struggle, I think, for many of us, and still for me and Kyle. But what have you done, and what have you tried so far to kind of bring that together? Like how do you piece those 2 parts together, or those many parts together? Like, what have you tried so far to kind of like fix that struggle of yours?
Well, I mean, it's still pretty new. What I've landed on kind of doing is integrating maybe a day of, not even every week, maybe once every couple of weeks doing a notice and wonder, and that's the whole math lesson. And then throughout the rest of the week, pulling groups and doing Zurn or doing whole group lessons and things like that. Just kind of trying to keep them curious, keep them wondering. And I do like that when we do a notice and wonder, then we can refer back to it. Oh, remember how, we had to multiply to do this, or you found this. And I have noticed in doing them more, my kids that are a little less inclined to participate are now starting to try. So that's really exciting to see. But getting them to transfer that also into their everyday work. But that's kind of where I've landed right now, is doing it once or twice a month, probably once or twice, twice a month I've tried.
Let me just try to repeat what you said there. Like, so what you're trying to do is like fit in, like, oh, I got to do a notice and wonder here. Oh, I got to get some Zurn in here. Like, is that some of the thought process that's going in? It's like, oh yeah, we got to go back to that. I like that resource. Oh yeah, we got to throw that in. We're just trying to grasp what your classroom looks like, so we can provide you the best feedback here. So is that kind of like when you're thinking about it? That's
so
jumping around a little bit, and you're like, I wish I could just I could fit this all in a nice flow.
Well, so our daily routine is Zurn. So the kids usually get 30 minutes to work on the computer, and then 30 minutes, and then 40 minutes is, part number talk and part me giving a lesson. And then finding a notice and wonder that kind of applies to estimation. Takes a while too. So some days that might be my whole group time is doing an estimation lesson. So Zurn has pretty much been the constant part of my lesson, and then trying to incorporate other activities that build that curiosity and build that interest. But like I said, my concern with Zurn is some of the kids aren't moving forward as fast, so they're not really getting the content that they need. And that's when I started saying, I don't know if I'm doing what's best. Like, I don't know if those kids that are getting through one or two, you're not moving through the material and you're struggling. So that's where I started saying, I don't know what's best.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? You helped, you actually read my mind, because I was going to ask you a little bit about the structure of a lesson. And I know that every day, of course, is going to look a little bit different here and there, but just to kind of get an idea, because you had mentioned before about like, the warm up or a number talk. And then you also mentioned like an exit ticket at the end. So it's really helpful to hear that it sounds like Zurn is something that you tend to do at the beginning. Yes. And you spend, it's like 30 minutes is a significant amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then move into like a number talk / lesson, and then maybe like an estimation. I'm wondering if you're picturing almost like looking at your math block, and sorry, how much time do you have? Because based on that, I see 70 minutes minimum.
So that's my dilemma. I actually, we departmentalize. So I teach all of third grade math. So I do 3 different classes. I do 3 different times a day. So I only get about 70 minutes with transition, which is a struggle this year, because in past years, I had a little more wiggle room. I had a little more if a lesson went long, whereas now I'm really limited to that 70-minute block.
Right. Okay. Well, that's really helpful to know, because I'm wondering if like we were to maybe picture your math block. You have this 70 minutes, and you can split it up any way you want. I know, actually, we already mentioned Andrew Stidell before. He has this idea of the classroom clock, which is something really cool to check out. And both John and I, really, it resonated with us. So kind of like breaking that 70 minutes down and thinking about, what that might look like, sound like. And, a few things that I heard, and it's only a wonder, but just about the idea of like number talks, estimation, like where like Zurn sort of fits in, and like maybe trying to structure like more generally, like these little blocks of your classroom clock, like almost like calling like a portion of that lesson, like the warm up, and maybe certain things fit into that warm up spot. And once that spot's taken up, then that like the other things that fit that category, like sort of don't fit that day.
Yes.
Right. So like, I'm thinking like, for example, a warm up to me might be a number talk or a mini lesson. I'm not sure if you're aware of like Kathy Fosno's work. She was a part of Christina Tondevolt's virtual summit this past summer.
Mm-hmm.
She has mini lessons, which are like number talks, but structured a little bit differently, like estimation 180. There's all kinds of things like you had mentioned Steve Wyborney's
Yeah.
site. So I'm picturing like maybe picking one of those per lesson
Yes.
rather than trying to like fit them all in.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, that's what I'm sorry. I was thinking over a week, I might do a different one. But yes, you're right.
I see.
Yes.
Beautiful. And then I'm wondering, like, do you mind sharing, like, so what are your hopes with using Zurn? And our apologies, we're not super familiar with what that tool sort of looks like, sounds like, but it sounds like, fairly probably independent for students to go in and sort of do independent work, learning / practice, I would guess.
Yes. So it basically takes the kids through, it's broken down into modules, and that's where I'm kind of sitting. Like, is this something I want to keep using? I love it, but I don't know that the payoff is there as far as the kids that lag behind. But, it's broken down into modules that cover like operations and, like multiplication or measurement. So our big standards. And so each module will cover like that standard. And so, like the measurement one they're doing now. And so it has time and then volume and liters, and they're working with that. And so it will take them through a little lesson, and then they practice that lesson. And then, they have an exit ticket based on it. So that's how it's structured. So basically it's the curriculum that I used to stand in front of them and teach, and then they'd have a practice worksheet or whatever it was. Now that's computerized is basically what that is. It's compiled on the computer.
Cool. So about 30 minutes of that. And then you've got about 40 minutes for, you had mentioned sort of like the other things, which would be like, if it's an estimation or a number talk. And then you had mentioned like the lesson. So I'm wondering, would the work in Zurn be connected to the lesson, or would it be sort of different depending on where students are? And how do you select that lesson for the day? Is there, like thinking about that learning goal and, where you quote unquote are in the standards, or what does that look like? So
they actually have lessons. It's a small group lesson that goes with the content that they're learning for that day. And so it is a little bit of a direct instruction based on that skill, because they're not going to get it all strictly from the computer. So yeah, the whatever my lesson is based on what they're already learning in Zurn. Gotcha. So it's kind of like a introduction to what they're doing, or a recap. But then again, my struggle is the kids that, we're passing, and some are moving ahead. So.
Now you mentioned Threeact maths earlier too, like a Threeact math type of activity. How does that fit into what you're working on with what that 70 minutes looks like? Is it a routine thing or not a routine thing? Where would that fit in your lesson?
So when I do a Threeact task, that's usually all we get done for the day. We might get some kind of a number talk in also, but they pretty much take. I devote the whole time to that. So I wouldn't say it's routine yet, in that we do it every Monday, or we ever, because I wasn't sure. I watched, Robert Kaplinski as a webinar on kind of this idea of similar stuff. And he was like, once or twice in a unit. So I wasn't sure how much is overkill. Do they transfer? So I've only done a few this year with my kids. I think I've done 3 or 4 so far. So, it's not a routine in that we know when we're doing, you know what I mean? Like the kids are like, oh, we're doing this now, but I give it, whenever we do it, it's the whole period.
Gotcha. Sometimes they do, the way Dan presents it, or if you've sat in Robert's sessions when he's done one, they do seem to take a good chunk of time to get all that thinking and ideas and communication and wonders and notices all out in the open. So it definitely, they definitely take a lot of time, especially if the kids aren't used to them, like if you've done 1 or 2 or 3 and they're like, what is going on here? Like, what do you mean notice and wonder, sometimes that can be like almost like my first few were like pulling teeth, like asking the kids to notice stuff. And so yeah, they can definitely use some of that 70 minutes. So I've definitely been in that situation where my class went by and that time was gone. And you know, since then I've learned to kind of move the class along so
Okay.
that I don't use my whole 70 minutes to do
Okay.
that. I usually aim for about 30
Okay.
to 40 minutes now, when I do those tasks. And you know, that's just, I think for me, that just came with experience in knowing like when to cut off a notice and wonder, and when to say move on to the learning goal for the day, and try to get some of that thinking out into the open. What do you think, Kyle, on that one?
Yeah, for sure. And I hear this a lot. Like the question we get a lot is, where does a 3-act math task
Mhm.
fit? So for those at home, and, John and I have been talking about them on the last couple episodes. But for those who are unaware, we're giving students this like provocation at the beginning with a video or an image or something along those lines to spark curiosity. And I'll be honest, like I used to save them for like the review.
Mhm.
And after a few years, like I realized like it wasn't actually like working very well for me by doing that. And maybe it's just me, but I know, John, you're very similar
Mhm.
in your approach now. Like we've sort of flipped our teaching style. So when we do the formal lesson, we've actually started using the 3-act math task as a way to teach. So, we talk about this as like teaching through task. And, a great resource you might consider would be reading some of the work on Marion Small
Okay.
or other people who use sort of, we'll call it inquiry approach. I'm really scared to use that term because a lot of people have like negative thoughts when they hear that word. But we don't mean inquiry like students just go off and do whatever they want. But what we're doing is we're actually picking a learning goal ahead of time, and we're actually using a task that's going to elicit specific or particular mathematical thinking, and typically has some sort of low floor and really high ceiling, so that hopefully we'll be able to capture some of those students you had referenced before. You had mentioned that the
Mhm.
diversity in the room and the learning gaps. Some students down at 1-to-1, and some students way up at more automaticity with multiplication and so forth. So for us, like we're trying to take a task, and we want to like elicit the math learning through the task, and then the teaching happens like when we consolidate the actual task. So that might be maybe something to try,
Okay.
like rather than let's say doing the 3-act math task and just kind of like hoping. Like what I used to do was I would give a 3-act math task after I thought kids had everything they needed to solve it on their own, and I sort of just let them go. It was like problem
Sure.
solving time, just let them go. But now it's sort of like putting them in this productive struggle where they really only have the tools in their tool belt. Like typically I'm saying like no calculators unless it's the numbers
Right.
are all ugly decimals and
Sure.
things like that. But typically to keep it low floor, I try to keep the numbers like nice and tight, at least early on. And then after, when we're watching the students solving, like trying to pick up where students are and then sort of facilitate that consolidation to elicit some student thinking and help students see multiple representations. And then I do a little bit of that direct instruction during that process to try to like push everyone's thinking just a little bit further, rather
Okay.
than me sort of doing this big full lesson and giving definitions and steps and examples and all
Right.
these things where I know half the class is already shut down and the other
Sure.
half of the class probably already knew this stuff. And
Mhm.
I'm just up here talking, and what do you know, the bell's ready to go. So like is that in your mind? Do you have any like maybe questions about that or any confusion about? I know that was like pretty heavy what we just shared right there,
No,
but
yeah,
that's sort of like what's rushing to my brain right now as I hear this conversation.
that makes a lot of sense. And I do try very hard to give them as little information and structure as possible. I do wonder how do you handle the students that are pretty quick? And I know
Mm.
high ceiling, but even in that high ceiling, some kids are still really quick. And so I think probably my biggest downfall is allowing it to go a little longer for those struggling kids. And I know some kids will never get the answer, but when you see that student who's not inclined to try and they're trying, you're like, ooh, I'm going to give you another minute or two to keep
Right.
working because I really, I want you to have that success. But and it's not a huge problem, but there's always one or two that are done way faster than everybody else, which is always an issue. But how do you manage that in when you're doing a 3-act task? Like,
Sure.
what do you?
Yeah, sure. So usually what we do is in the planning stage of that is when we start planning our lessons, we use a resource called the 5 practices of productive, or sort of orchestrating productive mathematical discussions. Have you heard of that book?
I haven't.
It's a good book. We'll put it in the show notes for sure to
Okay,
reference. But it ended up being my go-to guide. Like I was doing when I first started doing 3-act math talks, I felt like now when I look back on it, I was doing them all wrong. And I started to, with trial and error, do it a certain way. And when I found this book, I was like, this is what I've been doing, and it gives it a name. And it became like the guide to using 3-act math tasks for me, and I know for a lot of other teachers that they use it for that style. But it's definitely a 5 phases of a lesson that can be used not just for a 3-act math task, for many different tasks. But the first phase is one of the most important phases, which is the anticipation stage, which is when you say, like, for example, the first one that I ever did was a task by Andrew Stedell, and it was that filing cabinet one. Have you seen this one?
I haven't.
This one's a great one.
We'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew has a video of him covering part of a filing cabinet with sticky notes and numbering them all. And then it's a very short clip. And, every kid, the question when you ask notice and wonder, and you ask them to, think, pair, share on that. What do you notice? What do you want? Then turn to your partner. What do you notice when you wonder? Have a share, and then you share it out loud. Like, everybody's going to say how many sticky notes cover that filing cabinet. Like, that is a great one, because that question is coming out, and I always line that one up when I start area, but also start surface area if I'm teaching surface area, but also just area of rectangles is a great starter. And what happens is, when I'm planning that lesson, I'm going through all the possible ways kids would solve that problem. So I'm actually doing it myself on a piece of paper in my prep time or my planning time. And so I might say, well, the kids will get the dimensions of this, and they'll divide the dimensions up before they find the sticky notes, or maybe they'll find the area of the sticky note and find the area of the rectangle, and then they'll divide. There's different ways of doing that. But one of my most important planning aspects is what happens when a kid's done early. So, which always happens, like 3 groups are going to be done early and the other groups are half started. So I know that I'm going to have to spend time with the pair or one kid who's just half started. And what cuts down on that, Nicole, is pairing kids up. And I randomly pair kids up and have them work in groups of 2 all the time. And I know people will pair them up, or not pair them up, but put them in groups of 3. A lot of people like groups of 3. I'm a big fan of groups of 2, but that will also alleviate some of that group didn't get started that group got started a little faster than they would have if it was just isolated, because now, one of them has an idea that they can start. But going forward, that is one technique to what do we do when that group is done, is we have like the extensions ready to go. So it's super important planning phase, so that when that group is done, you're like, oh, just hang on, kids. Like, you don't want that to happen, because it's a waste of time.
Right.
So every task you can extend it, and you think about, like, what could I do now to either extend this idea? And if we're talking about Andrew Stedell's task, I might say, like, what happens if I change the sticky notes from 3x3 to 2x2? Or what happens if I have to cover, like, if I put the garbage can on top, like, like, what happens if I don't cover that one face? So
have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I definitely have those questions written down somewhere. Right. And eventually, the more times you would do that lesson, you don't have to write them down anymore. You just know them. So, or you remember that these are the questions I'm going to ask the kids in the groups that are done early. Some people write them on cards and just pass a card out to a kid. I know Kyle has done it where it's the question will relate to something that they did a day before. So now it's like, what percent is covered if 3 sticky notes are on there? So you're trying to stretch back or even stretch forward Kyle, what do you think about that, about kids being done early? I know that's a big question that we've had before too.
Yeah, and something else, and I think everything you said, John, is definitely a great strategy. I also know that a lot of people. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of spiraling, Nicole, but spiraling is something that a lot of teachers tend to be thinking about now, realizing that we tend to teach math in silos,
Yes.
right? Like we use
Mm-hmm.
units, and then we're sort of like hanging out in percent land for a week, and then we go into integer land for
Right.
2 weeks, and then you don't see these things ever again. And like the parts that John's talking about, these extensions, are great opportunities to kind of stretch the thinking and sort of cycle back to some of these ideas. But then the other piece that I always like to use in order to slow things down a little bit is to really be heavy on the tools and the representations. So, like the math
Mm-hmm.
models for students to convince us, because oftentimes what we see is the students who are finishing fast oftentimes are relying on procedure and don't necessarily have all of the conceptual underpinnings. They may, but oftentimes they struggle to have the adaptive reasoning to actually articulate and justify like why what they did actually works. So, for example, if it's I'll put it somewhere in middle school, if we're solving a proportional relationship and a student multiplies by this and divides by that and gets the answer, and it's just like this number divided by that number multiplied by that number, like I want to push them to like tell me like what do those numbers mean, because oftentimes kids aren't showing the unit of measure and they actually don't know what it is that they're actually doing. Like when you divided that,
Mm-hmm.
why does that actually make sense in this problem? And even though you can get an answer, like could you actually apply that strategy when things get a little more complex, like add one more layer of complexity, be it next unit or be it next year? Are you going to be able to keep up, or are the wheels going to fall off your bus? And I really want students to have that understanding that oftentimes math class is less about finding the answer and more about actually convincing us. A colleague I work with, Yvette Lehman, uses that all
Yeah.
the time. Like she's like, I don't believe you, she says to kids, straight up. She's like, the kid says the answer is
I
this, and
believe
she's
it.
like, I don't believe you. And they're like, well, look, I did this. And she's like, I still don't believe you. Like, I don't understand what you just did there. And it really puts kids in this spot where they go, huh, you know what? Like, yeah, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. And that's where we can start looking at things like different models, like linear models or area models or set models, or, like these things that I was never exposed to when I was actually learning in the classroom. And I never knew about when I was teaching in the classroom for the majority of my career. But these are things like we can sink our teeth into. And for me, in my mind, these are big difference makers in order to sort of close that gap between that one-to-one counter and that student way up top, is that you're kind of bringing them together when the student at the top realizes that, wow, I know
Mm-hmm.
how to memorize stuff, but I'm actually not that much further than that kid way down there. And when everybody sort of comes to that realization, you go, huh, this is the math class is more than just coming up with this with an answer and a therefore statement.
Well, and I really liked your podcast before where you talked about having everybody use concrete, and the kids as they go will learn. The ones as they build their confidence and understand, they will realize it's more time consuming. Because I used to discourage kids that I assumed were higher, like, oh, you don't need the concrete, you don't need the, you know what I mean? Like you just want to play with the manipulatives, you just want to waste your time, and I would actually discourage
Mm-hmm.
them from using them. And then,
Us too.
yeah, because you're like, no, you don't need that. It's not. And so that really resonated. I haven't done that recently, but it really resonated. Like, and that idea of sometimes those quick math students can't prove it with concrete. And so, but yeah, that was kind of an aha, like, yeah, they will probably, learn how to use them responsibly, but really encouraging everyone to prove it and give representation, because that is the hardest thing. And it is so bizarre to me when we do the estimation and I make them write their reasoning. I say, if I walk up to you and say, prove it, what are you going to say? And if you ask them, they'll tell you in a second. But man, you make them put that pencil to paper and they act like they have never thought out a thought in their lives. They can't do it. And so that's really been something I'm trying to get them to be able to have confidence. Like, if you can say it to me, why can't you write it in a sentence? And so trying to model that too, because they don't know how to prove it on paper, which is, with testing and things, that's something they need to be able to do. So
definitely. If we go back to your main struggle being, how do I put these things together? And something that I do that tries to put all of these things together is I usually do a routine, and in this routine always, usually happens when I introduce a new idea. So like, for example, we go back to Andrew's filing cabinet. If I'm starting area of rectangles or calculating area of rectangles, I'm gonna, that lesson might start like I do a warm-up activity like Kyle mentioned before, and usually on my classroom clock, that might only take I might budget 10 minutes to do that warm-up. So that might be an estimation activity, or a would you rather activity, or which one doesn't belong, or a number talk. So I'm in that warm-up activity. I actually thoughtfully do not make it about area of rectangles. I'll make it about something else from our course, or maybe it's just number sense, like an estimate that the estimation problems are. And why I do that, especially if, say, a would you rather relates to something else from my course, is that what, like Kyle said, that idea of spiraling. It's keeping fresh ideas in our mind. So I'll budget that time for that, and then if it's a new idea, I will go through that 3-act math task, like the filing cabinet, and teach through that task. So like what Kyle said is, and if we refer back to the 5 practices book, that first stage was anticipation, but there's 4 other stages during that lesson. The next one is the monitoring stages, when you give them the task, walking around from group to group, which we just talked about. If a group's done early, you can give them the next steps. And what you're also doing is watching for those representations that we talked about, so that we can bring them out into the open. And that selecting and sequencing are those other phases of the practices. Like, how do I select which representation we want to show to the class, so that we can bring that learning out into the open? And the sequencing is which ones are which order. Do I have to show everybody's solution? No, I don't have to do that. So, and then the last phase of the 5 practices is connecting those ideas together. So if a student, if we refer to Andrew's filing cabinet, I was blown away when one student found the area of the face of the rectangles, and then the area of a sticky note, and divided them to find how many sticky notes. I knew that answer was coming, and if I had taught that lesson, like, hey guys, we're going to do this cool video problem, and let me show you how to do it, that's what I would have showed them. But what I was blown away with is another kid solved it completely different by dividing up how many sticky notes would go up the side, and then how many would go over. So they broke the width and length and height down in terms of sticky notes, and then found area that way. And that wouldn't have come out into the open, and for us to analyze, like if I had just shown them how to do it.
Right.
And that kid who thought of that at the beginning of class, like, oh, I got this idea. And if I had taught it the traditional way of saying my solution, they would have thought they were completely wrong. Like they would have had that, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. The teacher didn't do that. I must have been wrong. And I never want that for my students. So that's why teaching through the 5 practices and teaching through the task can be so valuable for all those kids. And then once you connect those ideas together, that's like what we said, we call that the flipped class. Really, the flipped class is, and it's not about technology. It's just about, like, now it's time for us. Maybe we do a note at the end. We go through, like, what did we do here? We talked about area of rectangles. Well, let's go through, like, and it also might be the case where your kids really struggled with area of rectangles, like the majority of them. And that's fine, because that gives you the chance to stop the class and go, we need to teach this right now. And you can have a mini lesson on area of rectangles in the middle of your lecture or a lesson. And then they can send them back to finish that one off. And then the next phase, and what I always do in my routines, is why I budget 40 minutes for those those activities and have all that happen within those 40 minutes is I definitely want practice to happen on the concepts that we're learning that day. Like I choose that learning goal on purpose so that by the end of class, we've accomplished the learning goal we set out to accomplish. Like if we wanted to learn about area rectangles and then practice area rectangles, we did that by the end of class. So that practice could be, it could be, turning back to your Zurn at the end. And now we're going to go and practice using the activity that they're already used to practicing or learning from. So it could be going straight to the questions because you've already done like a
Sure.
mini lesson. But I think, the having that lesson set up that way gives your class a different feel, that it gives them that sense of belonging, like their voice matters. Like that one kid who presented that solution, which was different than the
Yes.
one I would have probably done, is feeling like $1 million, So and that would be what my 70 minutes would look like. It would end with practice and in a little, probably a mini note right before we turn to that practice.
The next day, do you do those activities every day? Like some kind of, maybe not at Threeact, but every day you do some kind of an inquiry,
Every new idea. So for example, at the end of that lesson, if I felt like my kids they were masters of area of rectangles and we were ready to move on to circles, or we were ready to move on to trapezoids or whatever we were doing next, I might, if that was true, then I might do another task the next day to introduce that idea. But if I didn't feel like my kids were ready, that might turn into a practice where we have the kids up at the boards solving problems together, or we would sometimes I use something that I've got off a few teachers called like row games, which are like activity sheets that your one partner has these questions and your other partner has these questions, and you're doing the questions simultaneously. They're different questions, but their answers are the same.
Oh.
So that when I get answer A and you got answer B, or you've got column B questions, and we check our answers, they should be the same. And if they're not, then we have to talk about why.
Cool.
So I try to make practice a little bit more engaging than just regular kind of practice, but my second day might look like that.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note too that not every task, like if we're going to teach a new concept, every task doesn't necessarily have to have a video. Making it as visual as possible, I think, is helpful to lower the floor. So super helpful. But sometimes there's like, you can find a really interesting problem, and even just through telling it like a story can be really helpful. And I do want to make sure that before we start wrapping things up, I want to make sure that you don't get us wrong. We're not expecting all of this to change overnight, but
Sure.
just to give you some things to think about and to kind of chew on a little bit. So we're wondering though, at this point, like, is there anything that from this conversation that you feel like you might be able to put into practice, like almost immediately, like something, that resonated with you and you're like, yes, I'm going to do this like right away. And then maybe, is there anything that you think like you like the idea, but you have to give it some time because it's got to sink in. You got to think about it, maybe, chew on it a little bit more. Do you mind sharing with us if there's anything like that?
Well, I definitely like the idea of challenging those high flyers to be a little more in depth with their explanations and improving it, and having that next question for them, or those kind of things. And I like the idea of finding different ways to get them to practice as well. I don't really feel that there's anything that seems out of reach. Honestly, I feel like a lot of it is things that, I've already kind of started. I just need to hone down. And I like the idea of making it a 40-minute, being mindful. I think my biggest struggle is I really enjoy hearing the kids talk. And so it's very hard. And maybe I need to set a boundary with the kids. Like, I'm going to get 5 good, because they get so disappointed when you don't listen to them all. And I genuinely could spend an entire math class listening to all their reasoning. Like I really could. And so I know that's my struggle, is I let too many kids talk about it, but it's hard. It's hard to limit yourself,
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
So
those are good. Those are definitely good reflections on your part there. we're hoping that you've got some good takeaways from this, and it sounds like you do.
Definitely.
It sounds like you do. We're coming up on an hour, and it's already been almost an hour, and I can't really believe it. But we want to know, would it be okay, Nicole, if we follow up with you like this again, like talk with you in about 6 to 12 months to see how things are going, like a check-in, to see
Absolutely.
how
Absolutely.
things have changed or that kind of thing. So, well, not to say that we don't want to communicate for 6 to 12 months, but
Don't call me. I'll
definitely,
call
you can
you.
definitely email us or send us a tweet or whatever your communication method is. We're always our ears are always open. We're always open to answering those kind of emails. So yeah, we would love to follow up with you to see that change that you're making.
Yeah, I definitely will. And I'm sure I'll have some questions as I go to implement, like, wait, what did they, because it's a lot. But yeah, I really do. And I'm so excited about math this way. Like, it really has been a big aha to get kids excited and encourage them to have the questions first before we give them the information. And I love that idea. So I feel that I've been searching kind of for this my whole career. And so I am excited, for the way it's headed.
Oh, that's amazing.
Awesome stuff.
That's awesome. That makes us feel so good inside. And that's exactly, hearing that from you is what, fuels John and I to want to do this work, because, when we felt the same way when we were inspired by, John had referenced on a previous podcast, for him, Marion Small kind of sparked his thinking with open questions. Yeah. And for me, it was Dan Meyer. And since then, it's been so many people, and you've mentioned so many of them here today. We talked about, we heard Robert's name and Christina's name and Steve Wyberny's name and Andrew Stedell. Like, so many people are out there doing really interesting things. And just like you've expressed to us today, like, as cool and awesome as that is, it's really, really overwhelming as well. And,
Completely.
I want to, tip my hat to you that you were willing to come and, sort of share that with us and with everyone else, because I think people at home probably, can relate. And some people might be listening going like, oh my gosh, she's so much further ahead than I am, because I didn't even know who any of those people are. Right. So, wherever we are in the journey, the best part is coming together and really trying to build off of the collective, like the knowledge of the collective here. Yeah. So we want to thank you. John and I both want to thank you. And on behalf of the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast community, thanks for spending your time tonight and, pouring it all out on the line with us. And we can't wait to check in with you along the way, but also to bring you back on and, say 6 to 12 months to see how things are going.
Well, I'm excited, and I really appreciate all the things you guys share. Like, it's amazing. It's really neat that there's people out there like you guys that are willing to share your expertise and be so helpful to those of us that are trying to learn more along the way. So.
Awesome.
It's truly an honor for us.
So
thanks again. And hopefully we will see you out on in the Twitter sphere or on Facebook or through email. But regardless, thanks again. And we will be in touch in due time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great night.
You too.
Well, there you have it. That was Nicole Martin from Las Vegas, Nevada. We're looking forward to checking back with her to see how she's incorporated her biggest takeaways from this call over the next 6 months to a year.
This was the first Math Mentoring Moment episode, with many more to come, where we will have a conversation with a member of the Making Math Moments That Matter community like you, who's working through a challenge, and together, we're going to brainstorm ideas and next steps to help overcome it.
If you want to join us on the podcast for an upcoming Math Mentoring Moment episode, where you too can share a big math class struggle, you can apply over at makemathmoments.com/mentor. That's makemathmoments.com/mentor.
In order to ensure you don't miss out on new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform by simply searching or using these quick links.
For iTunes, go to makemathmoments.com/iTunes.
For Google Play, go to makemathmoments.com/play.
For Spotify, go to makemathmoments.com/Spotify.
And quick links will work for most other popular podcasting platforms as well. Also, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share this podcast with a colleague and help us reach a wider audience by leaving us a review on iTunes, and go ahead and tweet us at MakeMathMoments on Twitter. We would love to hear what you have to say.
Show notes and links to resources from this episode can be found at makemathmoments.com/episode 5. Again, that's makemathmoments.com/episode 5.
You can also find Make Math Moments on all social media platforms and seek out our free private Facebook group, Math Teaching and Learning, K through 12. Don't miss our next episode.
But if you're not interested in waiting till then, why not watch our 4-part video series to help build resilient problem solvers who don't want to stop learning math when the bell rings? You can find that free 4-lesson video series at makemathmoments.com/lesson1. That's makemathmoments.com/lesson1.
Well, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And high fives for you.